I was actually a young teenager when I used to go to my grandmother and grandfather's in Middletown, Connecticut. We were living in Charlestown, in the projects in Charlestown. They were brand new back in those days. I was going to stay with my grandmother and grandfather, who I loved. That was the most important thing, And they did live in the country, So it was a nice change from being in the city. One of the times I went, they rented a cottage on Crystal Lake. My aunt and uncle lived on Crystal Lake, and I had spent a lot of time at their house. But this particular summer, we stayed in a cottage right on the lake. And the fact that it had an outhouse was really, that was intriguing because I wasn't used to an outhouse. And my grandmother always kept a, pot or chamber pot, so we didn't have to go out at night. I just remember one of the nights my poor grandmother sat on the pot and got stung by a hornet. And she scared us to death because she yelled so loud.
This was inside the house.
This was inside the house. That same weeks that we were staying there, I also was swimming. I wasn't the greatest swimmer, but I wasn't afraid. And my younger cousin came up underneath me, and I went under the water, and I started to panic, and I was drowning, actually. And an older cousin came out and got me. And my grandmother made me promise not to tell my mother because she said my mother would probably never let me go back on vacation again. So for years I had nightmares because it always bothered me, and I never went swimming again. I would go in the water, but I would never swim again.
What is so special about being with grandparents in the summer for kids?
Well, for one thing, I think when you're with your grandparents, they let you get away with things that your parents don't let you get away with, They kind of, they cuddle you at night like you were still a little kid, They kind of bend to your will, Like my grandfather and I both loved ice cream. And when I was at home, I didn't often get ice cream. So we would walk. This was during the Second World War, so there was gas rationing. And you'd have to walk. We would walk 2 miles down to the center to have an ice cream. When I was staying with my grandmother, this was at their house, not on the, in the cottage that time. But I stayed at her house, and I looked out the window, and looked like tea bags hanging on the line. I said, Nana, what are the tea bags doing on the line? She said, I dry them out after I use them. She's going to always use them a couple of times because they were rationed and you couldn't get that many, When I went down for the ice cream, we were going to get a banana split. And we started to eat it, and my grandfather said to the person behind the soda counter, "You forgot to put the bananas in." She said, "We don't have any bananas. This is wartime, I felt so lucky to have grandparents because so many of my friends, their grandparents lived like in Poland or Italy, and they never got to know them, So they were envious of me because I had grandparents.